Ever found yourself in a situation so dire you wondered if divine intervention was your only hope? Picture a woman, a widow, once cocooned in the comforts of a content life, now on the precipice of devastating financial ruin. The untimely death of her husband, a devoted servant of God, had left her grappling with more than just grief. Her world had crumbled, replaced with a mountain of debts, and she stood at the foot of it, overwhelmed, helpless. Her husband, a man dedicated to serving God and his community, had left behind no riches, no inheritance, only debts. Debts that now threatened to snatch away the only family she had left, her 2 sons. The law of the land was such: if you couldn't pay your debts, you paid with your freedom. Her sons, on the brink of being sold into slavery, were the collateral damage of a debt they didn't owe. Driven to the edge, she found herself staring into a chasm of despair. The walls of her life were closing in, and hope seemed like a distant memory. The weight of her circumstances was crushing. Her heart ached for her children, for the life they were about to be forced into. She was a mother, her instinct to protect, but the chains of debt left her powerless. But even in the darkest corners, isn't there always a flicker of light, a glimmer of hope? She was a woman of faith, after all. She had seen the power of belief, witnessed miracles unfold. Could faith be her salvation now? Could the God she served, the God her husband served, provide a way out? It was a desperate situation, one that seemed devoid of solutions. But sometimes it's in the direst of situations that we discover our deepest strength, our unwavering faith. She had reached the end of her tether, but she was not ready to let go, not yet. Life had cornered her and she saw no way out, but was there a glimmer of hope in her faith? In times of desperation, where do you turn for help? There comes a time in each of our lives when we're faced with a situation so dire, so seemingly insurmountable, that we feel as though we've been backed into a corner with no way out. It's in these moments that we often turn to those we trust, those who offer us a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Such was the case for the widow in our story. Left with a mountain of debt and the looming threat of losing her sons to slavery, she found herself in a moment of utter despair. But rather than succumb to her circumstances, she took a different path. She turned to the prophet Elisha, a man known for his deep connection with God and his miraculous acts. With a heart heavy with worry, she shared her plight with Elisha. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the debt that threatened to tear her family apart, of the fear that gripped her heart at the thought of her sons being sold into slavery. But in her voice there was also a glimmer of hope. A belief that perhaps, through divine intervention, her circumstances could change. Elisha, moved by the desperation in her voice, asked her a seemingly simple question. "What do you have in your house?" To this, she replied, "Your servant has nothing there at all except a small jar of olive oil." And it was with this small jar of olive oil that Elisha began to formulate a plan. A plan that would not only require the widow's faith and obedience, but also her willingness to see potential in the seemingly insignificant. And so, a plan was set into motion, a plan that required faith, obedience, and a little bit of oil. A plan that would soon reveal a miracle in the making, a testament to God's boundless love and provision. But that, dear listeners, is a story for another time. For now, let us hold on to this moment, a moment of desperation turned into a moment of hope, and remember that even in our darkest hours, there is always a way out. What if the solution to your biggest problem was right in front of you but required unwavering faith? Such was the challenge before this desperate widow. The prophet Elisha, ever the beacon of divine wisdom, proposed a peculiar solution. He instructed her to borrow as many empty vessels as she could from her neighbors. It might have seemed like an odd request. Why would she need empty vessels? Yet the widow, in her desperation, chose to walk the path of faith. She did as Elisha instructed, knocking on door after door, collecting empty vessels, her faith unwavering. Then came the next instruction, even more peculiar than the first. Elisha told her to pour her scant amount of oil into these vessels. The widow must have paused for a moment, staring at her little jar of oil and the sea of empty vessels before her. But she had faith, and faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. She picked up her jar, her hands perhaps trembling, her heart pounding. She tilted the jar over the first vessel and began to pour. A thin stream of oil flowed out, filling the vessel. She moved to the next and the next, each time expecting the oil to run out. But it didn't. The oil kept flowing, a golden stream that seemed to defy the laws of nature. It filled vessel after vessel, the widow's disbelief turning into awe. The room was filled with the sweet aroma of the oil and the quiet, almost sacred sound of the miracle unfolding. As the last vessel was filled, the oil finally stopped flowing. The widow stood there, surrounded by vessels brimming with oil, her meager jar still in her hand, now empty. But the room around her was filled not just with oil, but with the tangible proof of divine intervention. A miracle had occurred right in front of her eyes, but what did it mean for her and her sons? The story of faith, obedience, and divine provision was only just beginning. The widow in our story certainly did. With a house filled to the brim with vessels of oil, she was able to turn her desperate situation around. Imagine her surprise as she began to sell the oil. Each vessel she sold brought more money than she could have ever hoped for. She was able to pay off her debts, every last penny. The creditors, who once threatened to take her sons away, were silenced. Her relief must have been palpable, her joy uncontainable. But the miracle didn't stop there. The proceeds from the oil sale did more than just clear her debts. They provided a comfortable life for her and her sons. From the brink of disaster, they were brought to a place of safety and abundance. They were saved from a life of hardship and slavery. Thanks to her faith and obedience, the widow and her sons could now live a life free from the looming shadow of debt. This was divine provision at its finest. God, through the prophet Elisha, had provided for the widow in her time of need. He had turned her little oil into a river of provision, enough to wipe out her debts and secure a future for her family. It was a miraculous turnaround, a testament to the power of faith and obedience. This story, found in the pages of the Bible, is a powerful reminder of God's provision. No matter how dire the situation may seem, no matter how impossible the circumstances, God is able to provide. He can turn a little into a lot, scarcity into abundance, despair into hope. The widow's story shows us that when we put our trust in God, when we follow His instructions, even when they don't make sense, He steps in. He provides in ways we could never imagine. It's a story of faith, obedience, and divine provision. A dire situation turned into a testament of faith, obedience, and divine intervention. Remember this story, for it is a shining example of God's power and love for His people. So, what was the message God was trying to convey through this story? The tale of the widow's oil is nothing short of a powerful testament to the miracles that can occur when we place our unwavering faith in God and obediently follow His guidance, even when it seems nonsensical from our human perspective. It's a reminder that God's plans often transcend our understanding, and His solutions to our problems are frequently far beyond our imagination. Imagine this: a widow on the brink of despair, with debts mounting and the threat of losing her sons as slaves, is instructed to borrow empty vessels and pour her tiny jar of oil into them. It may have seemed absurd, to say the least, but she obeyed. And in her obedience she saw the miraculous hand of God at work, turning her little into much. This story doesn't just speak about faith and obedience, it echoes the assurance of divine provision. It tells us that when we are in desperate straits, when the odds are stacked against us, God can create abundance from scarcity. He can multiply our little into much, just as He did with the widow's oil. The widow had little, yet she was told to prepare for much. Her faith and obedience were tested, and she passed with flying colors. Her story reminds us that God's provision isn't limited by our perception of what is possible. Instead, it is boundless, often going beyond what we can fathom. In the face of adversity, the widow's story teaches us to remember that with faith and obedience, divine intervention is within our reach. It encourages us to trust in God's provision, to believe in the miracles He can perform, and to remember that even in our darkest hour, God has a plan that can turn our scarcity into abundance, our despair into hope, and our trials into testimonies. So in our struggles, let's remember the widow's oil. Let's remember that faith and obedience can open the door to divine provision and miraculous breakthroughs. If you enjoyed this video and the meaning throughout this video, please hit the like button and share. We strive to bring you videos we think you'll enjoy about our Savior Jesus Christ and American history. Please join our family and subscribe to become a part of something bigger than what we can see, like spreading the word of Jesus Christ our Father. And may God bless you in all your endeavors. Thank you for watching.